especially from the US, to criticize Russia for its invasion of Ukraine. And analysts say it's caught between a rock and hard place. It must choose between maintaining close ties with its major defense partner, Russia, or the West, with whom it sought to cultivate stronger relationships in the past decade. Ishan Garg explains how India is walking this diplomatic tightrope.
India and Russia call each other time-tested friends. India buys a majority of its defense supplies from Russia, like these S-400 missile defense systems. India signed a deal worth $5.5 billion in 2018 for them, risking sanctions from the US. But the partnership goes even further back. Since India's independence in 1947, it's relied on Russia for fighter jets, guns and ammunition. It's also signed several technology transfer agreements that help it develop weapons domestically. But Russia's indefinite war in Ukraine is raising concerns that it may no longer be able to fulfill its role as India's major defense supplier.
But of course, if this turns into an insurgency, then Russians are bogged down for a very long time, right? So the issue would be that how do you deal with this, given that Russia's focus will be elsewhere and Russia's defense inventory will be needed elsewhere. So whether the relationship will have to be looked at differently then remains an open question at this point.
India is now increasing defense imports from countries like Israel to reduce its dependence on Russia. It's a long road ahead, but analysts say it might pay off in the long run. The war in Ukraine has already strained Delhi-Moscow relationship by forcing India into a diplomatic quagmire. And now India's key allies are hoping to lobby it into isolating Russia. On a recent visit, Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida urged Prime Minister Narendra Modi to take a clear stance on the Russia-Ukraine war. This came just days after the US President Joe Biden called India's position on Russia quote-unquote shaky. But despite the pressure, India has refused to criticize Russia, as it's still a key partner that India needs to counter China's influence in the region. Analysts believe India's other allies, such as the US, are also gradually coming to terms with this political reality.
One of the things that India has probably has been able to do successfully so far is that it has been able to convince successive US administrations, be it Trump and now Mr. Biden, that look, engagement with Russia is a strategic imperative for India. If you are fighting, or you are one of the few countries that are actually eyeball to eyeball with China along the border.
Those opposed to India's strategic silence over Ukraine warn Russia can't be trusted when it comes to countering China, especially as sanctions hit Moscow is expected to rely more heavily on Beijing to support its economy. But until India can develop its own military capabilities, it remains dependent on Russia, more so as it looks to increase its security footprint in the Indo-Pacific. This could provide both countries further scope to remain close partners.
So India is clearly of the view that it has to be inclusive imagination of Indo-Pacific, where China and Russia would also be as important partners as the United States, Australia, Japan are. Sometimes that doesn't go very well with Western nations, but that's how India is. India, as I said, has moved from non-alignment to multi-alignment.
Multi-alignment seems to be India's best bet. It knows isolating Russia could prove costly, but it can hope to maintain friendly ties with other nations by engaging on other fronts such as trade and climate change. Ishan Garg, CNA, New Delhi.